Om Jnana Timidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Dena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada, for giving us this Sangha. Thank you, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Lord Nityananda, for bringing this joyful process to the earth. And thanks to whoever was involved in getting us here to Kali Yuga, so we could take advantage of it. It's the most fortunate age. So there are some elements to powerful reading that I'll talk about now. Prabhupada writes, if you'll kindly read my books carefully, all your spiritual desires will be fulfilled. Can you believe that's in there? I'll say it again. If you'll kindly read my books carefully, all your spiritual desires will be fulfilled. How do you feel about that? Thumbs up? Any thoughts to how that works or how your spiritual desires would be fulfilled? Yes. Shastra.
Hare Krishna. The means by which the desires can be fulfilled practically through progressing in spiritual life is answered in his books.
Oh, that's nice.
As well as an actual significant bestowal of hope is there, because there's a serious progression that one can see, as well as all doubts being cleared, leading up to the highest realizations being expressed in, especially in books like Chaitanya Charitamrita.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to read on. You ready? Say yes. Several impediments to regular reading and study. Would you like to hear the impediments first? Inertia. What does that mean? You just say it more? Yeah, so how does it relate to not reading Prabhupada's books? Or an obstacle?
The resistance to take a book and read it.
Okay. What's the actual definition of inertia?
An object that's in motion stays in motion, and vice versa. So if you don't read, then it becomes harder to start reading again. And in the other way, if you get into a habit of reading every day, then it tends to be easier to continue that habit.
Yeah. And you have the etymology, right? Inertia.
Inertia is a noun, which means that property of matter by virtue of which it retains its state of rest or of uniform motion, so long as no foreign cause changes that state.
And practically, if you didn't do it yesterday, then you might not do it today. What language it comes from?
It comes from Latin, inertia, which means, it comes from the root of inert, which means, without inherent force. So in is without, not, or opposite of. And then ars is skill.
Okay. I have a hard time hearing that through that microphone. Next one after inertia. Does everyone have the idea of inertia? You already know what it means, but just related to this idea that part expressed that bodies in motion tend to stay in motion, bodies at rest tend to stay in rest, at rest. And so there's a way in which we might get out of the habit of reading, and then you can go a few days without doing it, right? It's possible? Then it might be possible for a week, right? Then how about a month? How about a year? 5 years? 10 years? Whole lifetime? Yeah. Next is distraction. Distraction. I always find it interesting because attraction really is what Krishna means, and distraction means anything that takes us away from thinking of Krishna. But distractions abound, don't they? Yes? Another one is getting overwhelmed with too much information. You might think, oh, I don't know if I can take all this in. Another one is fruit of reading, collecting the information to impress others or materialistic goals. So here are some techniques to improve your reading and study habits. One is to adjust your mood. And I've put it like this: associate with Srila Prabhupada by mindfully reading his books. A godbrother of mine, before he passed away, said, study Srila Prabhupada's books not for the information, but to associate with Srila Prabhupada. So there's a mood when we're reading and appreciating Prabhupada's association that we'll feel a closeness. And it's very inspiring when you read with that mood rather than thinking, I'll get information to use later, or, which is, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but this is a different mood. It was especially poignant when I heard it from my godbrother who was just about to leave the world, because he said it in an impassioned way. He said Prabhupada's association is available through his books. So don't miss that part. And it's one of the ways you can improve your reading. Another that I've found extremely helpful around the world is to find a reading partner or form a group. Did any of you have a reading partner? How's that working out for you? Let's use emojis today. I have a reading partner. Who do you think it is? It's my wife, Nira Akula. Because we live together, there's a way in which we have this pact that we'll not finish the day without reading together for some time. And sometimes it's a whole chapter of Bhagavatam, and if it's a really tight squeeze because we've been out all day or something, we at least read a few pages together. And it's nice because then you have somebody to share it with, and you also have somebody that helps keep you on track. Anybody here has a reading group? You want to comment on whether this is a valid way? Yes.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. I've noticed that with reading groups, we tend to miss a lot of information when we read on our own because there's so much to take in, especially with scriptures. But when in reading groups, I always gain so much more knowledge than I would have gained on my own because so many people have so many different insights.
As in when somebody in the group makes a comment, they notice something you might not have noticed, right? I found that also. When we read together at Govardhan, for instance, somebody always brings up a point from somewhere by their own realization, and you get more out of it because of the combination of the minds and hearts involved. Okay, here's from the Bhagavatam, 10th canto, Bhagavad Gita, 10.1. Prabhupada writes the following: the more one hears about the Supreme God, the more one becomes fixed in devotional service. One should always hear about the Lord in the association of devotees. That will enhance one's devotional service. Discourses in the society of devotees can take place only among those who are really anxious to be in Krishna consciousness. Others cannot take part in such discourses. The Lord clearly tells Arjuna that because Arjuna is very dear to him, for his benefit, such discourses are taking place. Then he, again in Bhagavad Gita, he writes at 9.1, this hearing process is recommended in the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. Quote, the messages of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are full of potencies. It's much to the point that Shastra Sarprada made. There are potencies within the sound vibration. The messages of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are full of potencies, and these potencies can be realized if topics regarding the Supreme Godhead are discussed amongst devotees. This cannot be achieved by the association of mental speculators or academic scholars, for it is realized knowledge. In the Adi Lila, first chapter, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Kaviraj Goswami quotes the verse, Tesham satata yuktanam, bhajatam pritipurvakam. And in his purport, Prabhupada writes, about how scientists sometimes get together and discuss their findings from their research. Have you ever seen that? They have generally a tweed jacket, and then they have those patches on their arm. And they sit and discuss back and forth. And Prabhupada said this is also the norm for pure devotees to come together and discuss the findings of their readings in Shastra. And he says, by that, then Krishna becomes pleased. So you can know that when you get together for discussing what you've read or reading and discussing amongst the devotees, it pleases Krishna. And there's a way in which the Bhagavatam mentions this also. How's that verse go? Bhaktya bhaktyam. Say the first two words. Say the second line. Say the third line's well known. It's a verse we're grasping for. I know the verse, but it's somewhere a little out of my grasp in my brain right now. But yes. Okay, let's hear it. That's it, right? Yeah.
Smarantas smarayantascha mitho.
So that's the first line. This means one who remembers and causes other people to remember. Smarantas smarayantas cha.
Mitho ghoga haram harim.
Then, because of that discussion, all these results of sinful reactions are being destroyed. It's something we were talking about this morning. It was in the purport. How one becomes free from samsara by the process of hearing and chanting. Then?
Bhaktya sanjataya bhaktya.
Bhaktya sanjataya bhaktya. By that practice of bhakti, then the early practice of bhakti leads to more advanced practices of bhakti. Bhakti comes from bhakti. Then?
Bibhrati ut pulakam tanu.
And because of that, one will develop these advanced symptoms, as we discussed from the song Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote. So in and of itself, this is a very high practice of devotional service, is to read together and discuss. And you naturally make advancement. Number one, it pleases Krishna. Number two, the sound vibration has potencies. And by those potencies, as Kapila Dev describes it, it's like when you eat food and it's digested, and you're not even sure how it's being digested, right? Yeah. So in the same way, when you hear and chant, then there's a way in which the obstacles to your bhakti, the anarthas, they're digested. In other words, the subtle material desires that are keeping us bound to the material world, when you hear and chant and discuss, it's like the digestion, those get digested. And you may say, well, how did my breakfast get digested? It's just by natural arrangement, by Krishna helping from within. Aham Vaiśeṣika naro bhutva. He's in there as a digestion. So he's in the sound vibration when you discuss. And if you want to know how do you become advanced, hear and chant together. Hear, discuss. Okay? Then Prabhupada writes in 1873, that's a date actually, not a verse number. Prabhupada is giving, in discussion, he says, if you actually believe in God, then try to understand what is God. Otherwise, how can you believe? Actually, he says, otherwise, how you can believe. If you do not know the person in whom you have trust, how can you trust him? I say, trust in him, but if I do not know that man, how can I trust? You must explain that this man is in this way trustworthy. Otherwise, what is the meaning of my trust? The science should be understood. What is God and what is trust? That you should discuss thoroughly threadbare. Say thoroughly threadbare. Do you know that phrase, thoroughly threadbare? If you've ever had a pair of shoes and you use them until your toes stick out the front, or a jacket or something like that, and you realize it's your favorite garment and you've worn it so much, it's just coming down, the threads are popping out. And that's how much you should discuss the topics again and again. It's as if you're even talking about the same things over and over again, but getting new realizations. So that's thoroughly threadbare. Otherwise, how you will be able to preach, he says. And then at Bhagavad Gita, in a Bhagavad Gita lecture in 1969, Prabhupada says, because everything is threadbare explained, you can have answer of all questions from this Bhagavad Gita, chapter by chapter. Everything is completely understood, yes. So there's all benefit to be had from going over, for instance, as Prabhupada mentions here, the Bhagavad Gita, over and over again. And I may feel, oh, I don't understand or something. Well, if you hear it over and over again, then Krishna will give you the understanding from within and from without as well. A couple of practical measures. One is to make your own index. At least mark the points that inspire you when you read. So I have a set of Bhagavatams that I had for a long time, and some of them have so many of these flags in them that I might as well have not used them at all because everything's marked practically. That's not true. There's some major points that I've marked. I found out that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur actually used to write in his books. He'd underline and do things like that. So I've done that, and every time I go through, I agree with whatever I marked. I'll see it and I'm like, yeah, very good. You did a good job. You marked the right thing. And these become a source of inspiration, these purports where you find something that really speaks to you. Collect them. Collect them, trade them with your friends. The next is make a list somewhere. If you want a real encouragement, make a list of the most encouraging points you come across. And then read it regularly to remind yourself of how optimistic you should be. And then if you like, you can write a little summary about the major points that you've gleaned from writing, from your reading. Because then you become really familiar with it and you can expand upon it. Is everyone okay so far? If you weren't, what would you say? You'd say that? You're so honest. Really, you are. You're very straightforward. Okay. The next is one of my favorites, and this is something you can do with a group of friends. It's called following a thread. So here's how it works. You get together somewhere, and it helps if you have a library near you, although it's not necessary. The digital thing can work also. And let's say you read a purport, and within the purport, when you come to a reference, for instance, in the purport, Prabhupada quotes, Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo. Then what you do is you pull out the Bhagavad Gita and you'd open up to Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo. And then you'd read that purport. And let's say when you're reading Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo, then you read something in there that relates to the topic, you'd pull that book out. And we've had sessions that went on for 2-3 hours where then the living room is full of books. They're just piled up. And you can see, oh, this one leads to that, this leads to that. And when you go by a thread, you're working on a thesis. And so to prove that thesis, you pull out verses and you get this sense of interconnectedness between all the Shastra. And that's a nice way to hear because that's a nice way to speak also. When you speak on a topic, if someone gives you the topic of talk about the holy name, then when you've practiced reading like this, then you'll notice that 5-6 verses come into your head. And you say, oh, this goes with that, and that one could connect to this, and I'll just move them around and make them chronological as far as the thought process goes. Have you ever done that before? Pulled out different books and followed a thread? Did you end up with a living room full of books? You've done it? Tabs? Okay, computer tabs. That's the other way you can do it as well. And it could be even more useful because then if you've saved them all, then you have them to go. And another one is something Prabhupada recommended, and he says, pick a book and learn it thoroughly. He liked that. Of course, he said, and not specifically in reference to this, but in general, he said, devotees should know everything about something and something about everything. But when it comes to Shastra, he said, specialize in a particular book and come to know it very well. My godbrother Dāsa got an instruction from Prabhupada to learn the Krishna book. And he spent his whole life going deeply within the Krishna book, memorizing paragraphs and chapters. And if you talk to him about Krishna book, he's fluent in it because that's become his specialty. Just like in academics nowadays, everyone specializes in something. If you're in the humanities, you'll specialize in an author or something, ultimately when you get up into the master's and PhD program, and also in the sciences as well, right? Right? Yeah. So you can do that with Prabhupada's books. Hanumat Prashak Swami is a great example of this. He's such a genius and very spontaneous devotee. And for years, he would carry one book with him. For instance, he used to carry the Upadeshamrita. How did he carry it? He had it in a bag around his neck, demonstrative. In fact, he read it in Spanish, even though that's not his first language. He just wanted to add a little extra challenge because his IQ is so high IQ people, they need a little extra challenge. But he became fully conversant with the Upadeshamrita. So you can pick a book and say, I'm going to specialize in this. I'm going to get a PhD in this book and make it my own. And of course, you read all the other ones too, but you can specialize in that. And then of course, after you feel really comfortable with one book, you can move to another book as well. Oftentimes you don't come to the end of it though. Another technique is to study selected sections of the Bhagavatam as an example, or the Gita. But for instance, in the Bhagavatam, we have divinity and divine service. What's our battle cry for that chapter? Get to 34. And the idea behind it is know all those verses in that section, know what they mean. Be able to converse about them. Get to 34. Here's some others. How about Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 14? That's an extremely important chapter for Gaudiya Vaishnavas. What if you made that your specialty? You went through it regularly, you learned the whole section, maybe even memorized all the verses in it. What would happen then? I mean, what would happen? What do you think would happen? Give her a mic, otherwise she won't talk.
You would be able to connect it to everything since you know it really well.
Exactly, and because it's a famous chapter, when you're reading elsewhere, you'll start to see the verses from that chapter too, because they're widely quoted by other Vaishnavas. And you have this sense of connectedness to that section of the Bhagavatam, and it'll spread out to your understanding of the whole Bhagavatam. How about Prahlad's prayers? Anybody ever look at those? Some devotees have looked at them. How about Queen Kunti's prayers? What if you said, I'm going to memorize all Queen Kunti's prayers, or even if you're not into memorization, you go through it and imbibe the mood of that and get to know those prayers very deeply. What kind of things would you do? If you wanted to know Queen Kunti's prayers in general, or I should say very deeply, what would you do? Give some suggestions. Yes? Read it daily. What else?
Take note of where it's referenced in other places.
Take note where it's referenced in other places. Anything else? Yeah?
I really like the commentaries and going through it and finding a
What'd she
deeper
say?
meaning. The commentaries and finding a deeper
Read the
meaning.
commentaries, yep.
Yeah.
Read the commentaries, very good.
And also like Bhagavatam classes from other devotees where they
Yes,
talk
and
about
you could,
the prayers.
there's so many others who have commented, have given lectures on it as well. Besides previous acharyas who've commented, then you've got all of the lectures that are there about it, right? What were you going to say?
Reading with others. As Gita.
Yeah, read with others, get into a Queen Kunti club. Okay, then you got Rishabhadev's instructions, Lord Chaitanya's teachings to Rupa Sanatan. There are many sections that are highly relevant to our teachings. They're all relevant in one way or another, but some of them are highly celebrated. And you can get into those, and it's not so hard, actually. You just have to turn your attention there, and you can easily do that. What I've done is to copy sections or transfer them to an easily viewable place on my phone. I like it on paper so I don't get distracted, so sometimes I make copies, and I'll just carry it with me. Like in my bag, I always have something. And I didn't just set this up because I came here. You can ask anybody. Like this, that's a copy of stuff I'm studying for my Bhaktivedanta exams. And it's right there on paper, and as soon as I sit down, I'm waiting for somebody, I just pull it out, and then I have it ready. It's not blank. It doesn't matter where you read from, because it's all sweet. But if you get absorbed in something, then it'll expand and it'll become part of your life, a significant part of your life. Okay, then you can pray to the personalities who appear in the sections that you're reading. Start to identify with Rishabhadeva or with Kunti. Prabhupada writes this: "We are sure, therefore, that everyone in human society will welcome Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, even though it is now presented with so many faults, for it is recommended by Sri Narada, who has very kindly appeared in this chapter." He's appeared in the chapter. So you can know that you're getting the association of these personalities because they're in the chapter. Create your own sacred space in which you read or study. If you have a special place you can repair to, I also recommend a do not disturb sign. I actually carry one with me wherever I go. And it means you're very intentional about your reading, so you put up your sign if you need to. And then aspire for good quality reading, even if you can only do a small quantity. So if you're busy, it's okay. Something's better than nothing. And if you can only read a little bit, go deeply within it. One of my friends who had to work for 20 years in a horrendously difficult job, working for the fire department, and oftentimes was on call for 48 hours in a row and get interrupted, and the sleep was interrupted. Difficult. But in the firehouse, he would always read at least one or two verses, and he'd go deeply within them. And I could see that it was sustaining him in the difficult job he had as a paramedic. Next is to break difficult or long sections into small parts. And this is something that I've done for myself. If you look at the whole Bhagavatam, it looks daunting because there's so much there, isn't it? Or how about the Adi Leela Volume 1? How do you feel about that? Huh? It's big, right? So you might think, oh, I could never read that. I'll stick with Sri Ishopanishad. And when you look at all the books together, which nothing wrong with that, if you look at them all together in one shelf, you might think, how could I ever read all these? Therefore, I won't read anything. It's too much. So I thought that at one time, and then I heard this lecture by a person called Brian Tracy, and he was talking about how to get things done. And in the lecture, he said, any large task that seems to be beyond your capacity, you can break into small parts, and he called them slices, And then if they're in small slices and you do them regularly, then amazingly, you'll be able to complete big tasks. Sounds commonsensical, doesn't it? When it comes to reading the books, I was driving home from somebody's house, and I was thinking about what he said, and I was thinking about all the books. As soon as I got home, I started noting down how many pages was in each book, because I realized that there's a finite number of pages. There's a finite number of pages in the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, right? At least on this planet. There are other planets, higher planets, where there's more volumes. So you can aspire for that too, if you like. And when I realized there's a finite number, I thought, well, let me get the number, because then I can divide it into small slices. So I made a little chart with a little help from my friends. And it had a list of all the Prabhupada's books, and then it had next to it time periods that it would take to finish each one. And I discovered that there was a finite number, and I could ascribe a certain number to read each day in order to complete within a set amount of time. How helpful on a scale of 1 to 10, you might say, Vaiśeṣika Dāsa? On a scale of 1 to 10, how helpful was that to you? I'd say it was about a 10. Because I immediately felt energized, and I thought, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick a number of pages I can read each day, and I know for sure that I'll complete it within a certain amount of time. And then I branded it. You want to hear what the brand is? Be a sage, page by page. And I took to this discipline of reading a certain number of pages a day. And at a practical level, on paper, I have these flags that you get at any office supply store. And you stick them, and you can unstick them. And unless you get some grit on it, it'll stick over and over again for maybe hundreds of times. And so what I do is get 2 of them, and on one of them, I'd write the number of pages that I was going to read every day. And on the other one, I put a little arrow. So there's 2 flags that I used and still use. So when I have the book, it has a starting place, I just move the numbered flag ahead by a certain number of pages. And then if I got distracted before I finished, I used the arrow to mark the place. And I knew all I had to do was keep going that day, whenever I could, to finish my certain number of pages. And I also knew that I was going to finish the whole book within a set amount of time. Do you think it would work? It does work. It works really well. And I introduced it to a lot of people. And then we made an app. The app's called Be a Sage, page by page. And I've gotten hundreds of letters from people who have said, I used the system and I completed the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita. And they send me emojis of fireworks going off and things like that, because you know what to do, you just do it. And are some sections thicker than others? Yeah. Are some easier to read than others? But so is when you go in Govardhan Parikram. Some places are easier than others, right? Yeah. But you just keep going because you're going all the way around. And so that's one of the ways that you can stay on track. And for instance, if you want Sridham Prabhu, you can read the whole Bhagavatam this next year in 2025 by picking 41 pages a day. How long does that take, you might ask? Right, Sridham? Ask me, how long would it take you? 1 year? And every day it takes about an average of 55 minutes, on average. So if you just chalk out 55 minutes a day and read your 41 pages, you'll finish the whole Bhagavatam in a year. Then you can tell all your friends. Put it on your social media. I just finished the Bhagavatam. People will say, how did you do that? What's more, you'll be a different person. You'll be a sage, a sadhu. You'll feel enlightened. You'll feel good about yourself, and you'll have knowledge. Now, if you can't do it in a year because you're so busy, just pick a smaller number and say you can finish in 5 years, which will take you 8 pages a day only. What do you think? Okay? Prabhupada said, get practiced automatically. That's one of his phrases. And so if you get into a routine and you do it over and over again, you get practiced. So Prabhupada, here's a conversation. Pradyumna, we chant all the verses in this chapter all together, starting from the beginning. Sri Shuka Uvacha, everyone can chant together. This is during the beginning of when Prabhupada is introducing how to read together. Srila Prabhupada and the devotees chant together all the verses in Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, 2nd Canto, Chapter 3. It's an example. They went through a whole chapter. Then Prabhupada says, so it takes not more than 5 minutes. If you practice, then you will become learned scholars, simply by chanting these mantras, and the translation, transcendental vibration, will keep you fit for spiritual advancement. Every verse in Vedic literatures, especially Bhagavad Gita or Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, they are not ordinary sounds. Simply if you chant the mantras, you become purified. Shrinvatam swa. Simply by hearing and chanting, you become pious. Punya Shravana Kirtana. Even you don't understand the meaning. The very sound vibration will help you. Now we have finished one chapter within 5 minutes. How much time it took, Prabhupada says? I don't think more than 5 minutes. He answers his own question. So everyone should chant every day at least one chapter. Then he says, then, next chapter? Which chapter? As they're going to go on from there. It's surprising how the mind says, oh, it's going to be hard. And then once you start, not only is it easy, but and the reason it's easy is because it's relishable. And when you do a chapter or a section over and over again, you start to get familiar with it, and then it has more and more appeal, because you're not struggling through the translation, or you're not struggling through the pronunciation. You start to get the rhythm, and it sticks in your head. So doing something over and over again. Here's another quote from Srila Prabhupada. I thank you so much for having nicely appreciated the Bhagavad Gita as it is. This book should be read by all of my students at least one chapter per day. And in Kirtan class, it should be discussed shloka after shloka. Practically, we have tried to explain in this book all of the basic principles of Krishna consciousness. If you can simply cram Bhagavad Gita, then you will surely become a very good preacher. Has anybody here ever crammed before for an exam or something? You just apply the same principle to Bhagavad Gita. It's really fun because you know how to do it, and it has a different feel to it when you cram Bhagavad Gita than when you're cramming for your exam. Because the exam is oftentimes, you just want to get it done so you get the grade or so you can move on and so forth. And obviously you learn something valuable. But when you cram Bhagavad Gita, it's all spiritual. Can you handle a little more? Yes, Vaiśeṣika. Okay, here's one. Prabhupada, the devotee says, Swamiji, should we read just one chapter, or Prabhupada, it is very nice if you read one chapter, Bhagavatam daily. It is very nice. You make it a point to read one chapter daily. That is very nice. Devotee, no more? Prabhupada, no, if you can do more, that's all right. Just like I ask everyone to chant 16 rounds, but if you can chant 1,600 rounds, then who prohibits you? You can do that. But we should make a regulation of our life that so many times I chant, one chapter I shall read, I shall go to the temple at this time. In this way, we must have routine work. Then we'll get practiced automatically. That's where I took that from. Get practiced automatically. Yes, and Goswamis, the 6 Goswamis, they were following routine work. Even they, Sankhya Purvaka Nama Gana Natabi, they were doing regularly counting. Just like you are counting 16 rounds, not only chanting in that counting, but they were offering obeisances also by counting. that hundreds of times I shall offer my obeisances. You see, this is regular routine. Have you ever tried that? Offering a certain number of obeisances in a day? I have. At one Kartik, I went to India, but I got knee pads from the sporting goods store. Nobody could believe how many I could offer because they didn't know that it was under my dhoti. Knee pads, I was bang, bang, bang. But you never go broke spiritually if you take these practices. And at any time, you can decide, I'm going to count this or count that. And it pulls you away from the ordinary. Who wants to live an ordinary life? It's boring. You want to have something pushing you and something that gives you a sense of adventure. And so there's many things you can decide to count in your practice of devotional service. And even if you add them to your very busy schedules for 3 minutes, 1 minute, 10 seconds, it'll change everything in your life. Okay, get ready for this. Are you ready? This is a very powerful section. So Bhava Charini, one of my goddesses, this in Hawaii, she says, whenever Srila Prabhupada was personally with us, we were all very happy. We could do anything. We were superhuman, and we were in Vaikuntha. Once in a class, he said, if you chant one chapter of the Bhagavatam in Sanskrit every day for 1 year, at the end of 1 year, you will be Sanskrit scholars. And then Prabhupada said, you can do this? He was in a class, and she's recounting. We said, yes, Srila Prabhupada, Jai Srila Prabhupada. He said, all right, you will do this? Second time he asked. Yes, Srila Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. 3 times he said, you will do this now? And 3 times we all said, yes. I've never met one person who's done this, she said. But when he said to do it, it seemed easy. About 2 years later, I did it for 6 months. And it made all the difference. So these opportunities are out there. Prabhupada said, chant a chapter of Bhagavatam every day. You'll become a great scholar. And then he repeated it 3 times. And then he also went on to say, if you do this, you'll go back home, back to Godhead. And then she said, the most amazing thing was, Bhava Charini said, nobody did it. And finally, Prabhupada, it is imperative, therefore, that all devotees in Krishna consciousness practice chanting some mantra. Certainly one should chant the Hare Krishna mantra, which is the Maha Mantra or great mantra, and also one should practice chanting Chintamani Prakara Sadmasu or Nashringa Stotra. Every devotee should practice in order to chant some mantra perfectly, so that even though he may be imperfect in spiritual consciousness in this life, in his next life, he will not forget Krishna consciousness, even if he becomes an animal. Okay, let me see if you have any reflections or questions. Yes. Sophia.
Thank you, Maharaj. So my question is balancing all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, can you hear me now? Okay. My question is balancing all of this. So between chanting japa, between reading, between work and other factors of life, I know that when choosing how to spend our time, we don't want to look at it as fruitive. We don't want to look at it as let's get results from this. Perhaps it's how do we deepen our devotion or some other type of outcome, or are you seeing it in a different way as to how to spend our time doing certain things, specifically reading in this case?
So can you please ask me a one-sentence question with a question mark at the end and no semicolons?
No semicolons. How do we balance and know how much to read each day or each time period on top of other practices?
According to your taste. And if you don't have any taste, you can start small and you'll develop a taste, because there's a sense of, oh, I'm starting to appreciate this. And then you can expand. If you start with what you can handle now and do it according to your capability, then it'll expand. After all, as Prabhupada used to say, and as Kaviraj Goswami says at the end of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, birds fly in the sky as high as they're able, but the sky's unlimited. So it doesn't matter how many you do, because there's always more. You may memorize a chapter of Bhagavad Gita, then you'll run into a little kid, 7 years old, who just memorized the whole thing. I've had that happen. Mukarv and his little sister, yeah, she knows the whole thing. Ask her, like, yeah, I know it. So it's for our own purification. When we get into adding a little spiritual practice here and there into our lives, then it is an opening that increases. At ISV, as a community, everybody's used to chanting a bunch of shlokas because we kind of snuck them in. It's like that apocryphal scientific study idea about putting a frog if you put him into hot water, he'll jump right out. But if you put him in a tepid water, he'll swim around, and then you just gradually turn it up, and they're like, "Arr." So in the same way, we've added more and more verses, right? Like first it was just Sharira Vijajal, then it was Ekadina Shantipure, then it was Prasade Sarvadukanam. And everyone's just used to it. If you grew up there as a kid too, it's like, yeah, that's what we do. And so we can add these things into our lives according to what we can do right now. As I mentioned, my friend who was very busy for 20 years and he could only do a little bit, that's enough for when you're that busy. And it starts to become a part of your repertoire and of your life, the routine of your life, that, of course I do this. I have friends that they always do their chapter. They chant their rounds, they'll do their chapter, they do their reading, whatever designation it is, 8 pages, 10 pages, 21 pages, and that's just their life. And when you get practice, as Prabhupada uses, practiced automatically because you have your little thing. You can do one verse, you can do one line, whatever it is, but add it in, because then it opens for you this freedom in Krishna consciousness where you have a taste for something that's non-material. Does that help? Yeah. Tejas.
Hare Krishna. So at the beginning you were listing out impediments while reading.
Yes.
And one of them that you mentioned was basically being inundated with a lot of information. Personally, I've found that the best way to overcome this is by having someone else teach you. But I feel like practically now, especially in ISKCON, we have extremely knowledgeable people that are becoming less and less accessible. And I was wondering if you have practical tips on how to overcome this issue.
Which issue? Of not having access to knowledgeable people?
Or if there's other ways to get around this issue of because I think this is even shastrically speaking, it's the best way, right? Your guru teaches you all of this information that's in Shastra and according to their realization. And it's not accessible now.
In universities, oftentimes, they're research schools, and so you'll actually meet the professor once in a blue moon, right? The guy shows up, whoever it is, and gives a lecture. And the rest of the time, you're dealing with TAs, right? So that's pretty much the norm. Great souls aren't always available, and then sometimes, they're always available, Bhagavatam says. And we can get association sometimes, but oftentimes that's enough to be able to get tutored by the actual professor who's doing research all the time. It's not as common as having TAs. So if you can find the TAs who are very dedicated and who are in the same mood, have the same kind of methodology, that's parampara. And there's a way in which you can find people like that because it's the law of attraction. If you're into that, you're going to find them. And Krishna arranges it too. So if you're very desirous of being into hearing and chanting, then you're going to run into somebody. Just an anecdote from when I was a brahmachari and I was learning Brahma Samhita first time. It was coming out a little at a time. Pradyumna's the one who was translating it. He just picked up Sanskrit really easily and he started translating. His first thing was to translate the Brahma Samhita because it was only available through the Gaudiya Math, but you'll see the Gaudiya Math version, it only has the Devanagari. There's no romanization of the Sanskrit. So he started romanizing it and doing the translation's already there. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta or somebody under him translated it. And so he brought it to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, keep doing this. And so he'd come out with installments, and I was very eager to learn the Brahma Samhita. And I was traveling through Singapore, and I ran into another brahmachari who was every day chanting the Brahma Samhita, and we chanted together. It was Krishna's arrangement. And he gave me his handwritten copy of the Brahma Samhita, painstakingly, with great calligraphy written it all out. Still have the copy. And I got on the plane, I was like, wow, this is cool. And then I saw these little codes on the side, CVAAA. What's that? And I realized he was taking the first letter of every verse and then 5 at a time, so I could catch in. That's how he was catching his mind, and I did that too. So I almost had it memorized. I know I'm giving a lot of detail, but the point was Krishna made that arrangement because I was into Brahma Samhita. Otherwise, why did he send me to Singapore to meet another brahmachari who was totally into Brahma Samhita, so much so he had made notations, and those notations helped me to memorize the sequence, because I could catch the verses individually, but I couldn't remember how they all went in sequence. That's another part of it. And my point is that, as Prabhupada says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pratyapur. No, Krishna says, but Prabhupada says in the purport that if you're very sincere and you try, then Krishna will make arrangements for you. He'll instruct you from within. He'll make connections with all kinds of people. So you can look in the yellow pages. Oh, you don't have that anymore. But the main way that you find really high-minded devotees is to become inspired to be high-minded yourself. Be very, very serious. And then Krishna makes all the arrangements for you to do that. Yes.
Hare Krishna. You were saying aspiring for good quality reading, even if small amounts of time. Would you be able to describe what is bad quality reading? Because I feel that if we combine bad quality reading with a tough section of Bhagavatam or the books, then that could lead to almost like not having picked up the book for days, months, years, and so on.
Bad quality means you're not really paying attention. And when you're not paying attention, or you're not showing respect by listening carefully, you may be doing something else, for instance. You could listen to a lecture and be on your phone scrolling. That's bad quality. So the quality of any of our practices or relationships has to do with how much attention we decide to give them. That's our form of worship, is our attention. And when we give our attention exclusively, for instance, when we're reading, there's a marvelous effect. We may hear things we never heard before. It's because we paid attention. I'm always impressed. Like when we had our reading at Govardhan this year, year 23 or 24, and I'd look out into the audience. We were reading 5 hours a day, and everyone was in rapt attention, and it deeply inspired me. And it was palpable, the quality of the reading, because everyone had come there very specifically to hear the Bhagavatam, and they weren't falling asleep, and they didn't go away. We took breaks here and there, but it's noticeable when you give your attention. You were going to say?
I had a question about how to balance the daily reading with like a chapter a day in Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam, along with more deeper reading of, as you said, like specializing in a specific thing. Is it required to do both?
Nothing's required. You can do whatever you want. You're a free soul. But if you decide, I want to be notably advanced and on the path of the saints, Then you start taking supplements and really work it out. Have you ever taken supplements before? Like what? You don't have to tell us about. It's like some people, they take a vitamin. How do they take it? They just do. They get a bottle and they put it on the counter, and every day they walk in, and after they've done it a few bottles over a few months, it just becomes a habit, like the hand grabs it and take it. So we got 24 hours in a day, right? Is that how many you get in Michigan? You get 24 hours in a day, so you get to decide. And it's not time. It has nothing to do with time. It's all about taste. We're living beings, right? Say yes. And living beings just want to have fun, as Cyndi Lauper said back in the 70s. And so there's a way in which we do what we wish, because that's what we are. We're pleasure seekers, and we're going after whatever we're doing it because our conception is, I'm going to get something, either to avoid misery or to try to get some happiness. And if we reorient ourselves to understand that my real happiness comes from these spiritual supplements I'm taking, and it's just like in athletics or music, you decide the pleasure of learning to play the violin is so attractive to you that you're willing to screech and scrunch for 1 year, unless you're somebody like our friend in Los Angeles, Kaivalya Balava, who learned it. I don't know how he does stuff like that. But fact is that you'll apply yourself because you know what you're going for. And Sophia, yes, you mentioned the result. If you're looking for a spiritual result, it is spiritual. It's not a material thing. That's why you can even set goals, and that's why the Goswamis set goals. They knew that if I fill my day with these spiritual goals, then I'll be closer to Krishna. Krishna will be pleased by this. So your question was
how do we, I guess, balance, or if we're specializing in a specific book or section, how do we do that, as well as, should we do that and daily reading?
If you can, you probably can. I mean, who was it who played 2 sports, baseball and football, same time, prime time? Who else? Bo Jackson did it, and so did, what's his name, prime time? No, Michael Jordan, oh, he tried. He's quit one and went the other one because he got gambling. And who's the other one? Deion Sanders played 2-4. So you could do it. Why not? I mean, I see all of you go, like, what's your major? I got a major and 2 minors. What's that all about? It's about greed. I want more, right? That's the nature of the living entity. You see, here's a whole university full of books, like, give me more of it. So when you get that feeling for the Shastra, which is not hard to do because it's a much more sublime experience, majoring in this and minoring in 2 other things, and you can use all your overachieving propensities for the Shastra. Why not? You're already doing it. You guys are in the top percentile of the world as far as studies go, as far as achievements go, as far as earning power once you get out into the world. And it's just apply it also to Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. Yes. Hey, this is great. Thanks for asking questions.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I don't have a question. I just want to say one of the things that
Please.
resonated with me. I really liked how you said to have an index of flagged key points and how we should follow a thread of going to different references and then how to build on it. It's very insightful, and how it's essential for preaching, and it's like really like drill it inside you, so you know at the spot, like in any circumstance, and you can just know what to say. And also how like reading at least one chapter a day, and also how cramming Bhagavad Gita, like for studying, like if we can do it for exams, doing it for Krishna is like another level. So I really like that part, and how this is an adventure. Like if we try to challenge ourselves and like, you know, push ourselves a little bit, it's like a whole extraordinary life together. It's not ordinary anymore. So I'm very grateful for today's class.
You caught everything. Nicely done.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I was wondering if we come across, like when we, sometimes I come across something in the scripture that I don't necessarily agree with or I don't resonate with, and I was wondering how to move on from that experience or just go about thinking about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a way in which when you go deeply within the Shastra, the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, you may come into places where it's discordant. So the rule is to keep it in a special category, to be investigated, to find context for it. Don't immediately react to it according to your present context, but put it in a box, park it, and say, I'm going to find context to see how this works. The premise is Krishna is all good. He only wants your good, and that applies on an existential level where you're living your life and then something happens. And tattenu kampam sisamikshamano, you assume a priori that that's Krishna doing something to make me better, right? And when we find a point that seems discordant according to my present context, park it, and then try to develop context. It's important because it's there, and it has to do with a thought process that is included in improving and getting us to a certain point. Some things may be anachronistic. They may not fit the time exactly. There's time, place, and circumstances. Other things may be cultural, and even in my getting longer but short life compared to Brahma experience of life, there are eras in which something that is normal then becomes taboo in another era. And it can happen just in 2 decades. You say what you used to say all the time if you were living in a cave or a hut like the crazy bomber guy who lived out in the woods by himself. And then you come back into society. What was he, the Unabomber? And you come back into society and you say something, it was like, looks at you, you're out of your mind. So then find from those who have more context. That's part of shiksha. When you find things that seem to be out of place or you can't fully justify them, find those who can help justify them for you. I have shiksha gurus like that.